So I'm going to go back to sharing screen and get on with our next full presentation here about what's happening with the models. All right. So this next conversation is really stemming from the most recent special report called Learning Leadership versus Systemic Inequity. So we put out a special report with 8 different models. I'm going to be showing those, and I'm going to be hoping that we're all going to discuss them together today. But you heard a little bit this morning in talking with Classical Academy, they're in a wildly divergent model. I think most traditional schools consider that their model had to mutate and alter wildly. And a lot of superintendents have told me directly in webinars in the past 6 months, they had to stand up a virtual model. So they're still thinking with 2 rails. Rail 1, everybody's in the physical building or who can be, and rail 2 is some online option. That's been the traditional thinking for a long time, but I'm going to show you there's many new ways to carve this up. So we're going to talk about what we now call hybrid logistics, which is an enormous conversation. There's no way I can get through it in a half an hour. I'm going to try. But I'm going to also show you the background data that the Learning Council research group is really looking at. As a research institute, we see so much data, and our big major national surveys, we really get into it. They take like an hour for a school or district administrator to take. So the biggest administrative pressures per the research right now, number 1, is that issue of space and time use. That's why I asked Nicole about master's calendars. That's why when I was talking to Stacy, I asked about like how they're using time precisely and if I can get a copy of her master's schedule, because those are the things that most school district superintendents are exhausted by. All of their administrative staff are exhausted by this. So students right now are demanding remote flexibility. You know, this is the generation, all these, even the parents, they grew up on their iPhones. They're expecting a pop-up in their text to tell them what's next, and it should be 10 words or less. So the iPhone generation is demanding flexibility unlike anything ever seen, and not just in space use, but in time. That is not predicted to go away. Since the start of the pandemic, there's been an eye-opening new awareness of what's available commercially. And therefore the model of grade and class structure, specific times of day, every day, that just blew up everywhere in the pandemic. So the master schedule complexity is a thing. You're going to see the commercial side step up in this area in the next year. There's already a lot of projects going on. Learning Council Research is already running a demo project that's going to be near completion in the next couple of months called the Hybrid Logistics Project, because we didn't find anything commercially that was available to really handle the massive mutations going on right now in the United States. They also have no admin time. Most superintendents are telling us, hey, so I spend all my time with pandemic battles, masks and things, and I don't have time to really like think about the future. I'm like in a mad scramble all the time. That's continuing this fall. We don't see it letting up until maybe late fall and going into next year, which is also going to mean that there's a huge bundle of CARES Act money that's going to hover. Like the bulk of the money that's been out there has not been spent. It will probably not all be spent for at least 5 years. That's what happened with the 2008 or whatever year that was with the first big stimulus that hit the United States. It took 5 years to spend all that money. It's going to take that long, at least for all of these CARES Act monies. Let's say where we are now. So before the pandemic, we were at 27% of the United States population of school-age kids already opted out. That the fastest growing segment was homeschooling even then at 20% annually. That's 55 million kids, probably closer to 56 million now. Where we're at now, in 2020, the average defection away from traditional public was 3.6% per district to any alternative. So that could have been a charter school, a private school, a homeschool, okay? And I'm including in the homeschool arena the commercial grade homeschooling offerings. And those might be full actual online schooling, or it might be just a subscription to a homeschooling curriculum resource that you self-pace. Many districts are experiencing well above that 3.6% still. The estimate of a total of 33.6 now opted out is conservative. I just saw an article about the fact that an average of 2 million moms left their work and now homeschool. So there's been a whole trend away from continuing to work during the pandemic, and a lot of those moms are not going to go back to work. So the median was over 5 million students nationally on top of the earlier numbers. So, and those losses are continuing in 2021 because we're in a very shaky landscape. Maybe there's another lockdown, or maybe there's a surge over here. And so it's just very unpredictable, and parents don't always like the unpredictableness of that. Although, you know, as we headed into fall, people were so excited to be back together, and that's had a big effect in certain states. And other states, they're not even allowing togetherness again yet. All right, so the number two biggest pressure was staffing. We're having a real problem in most of the states. I think Texas is an exception, even finding teachers and staff. So this is going to continue to be a problem because there's new mandates. And that problem is exacerbated by this data that the Learning Council found. I should make sure my chat window is open. So I'm seeing what your chat is. Okay. And then, so we have 74%, this was January when we surveyed this. Most teachers were feeling overwhelmed. That's continued because all through the summer, there was like a massive amount of professional development, which is still not done. And people are still sort of shaky. And if they're in a district that's like, oh, we got to close down for the next week or 3 weeks in a row now, they're being thrown back and forth between physical environment and all digital, or they're simultaneously teaching. It just depends on the place. So that burnout hasn't stopped because we just forced a good 50% of the market to go all digital in less than a year. So most teachers feel they're unable to easily personalize learning for students in the changed conditions. This was a little bit about what Robin and I were just talking about. There's a huge Google Docs component to the market, and Google Docs is being used as an LMS in many places. 60% of schools and districts have Google. They might also have an LMS, but not all of them. And it's really hard to fully personalize learning. So the continuing whole group mentality, when the digital thing happened, actually perpetuated a little bit of the loss of achievement because you had to try to keep whole group. And so you didn't have any time as you're scrambling to build lessons to pay attention to students who might have been falling behind and really truly personalized. Another thing is that, and this is a biggie, 60 or 40% actually of teachers are saying they're overly sidetracked into repetitive distribution and collection of assignments, resources, or communications. This is part of that digital Wild West that's happening. It's like log in over here, now log in over there. You might have single sign-on, which is awesome, but you're still sort of running a disparate user interface, user experience, and that they're not used to. They're used to going to class. And when they got to class, the teacher put notes on the board and said things, and you knew, and you got handouts. But now you got to have a lot more student agency. And even that's continuing even when you're back in the building, because now you're probably using all digital as much as you can anyway. And the navigational experience on the teacher is, 5,700 email, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, a lot of email traffic, parent traffic. Then you got to check 16 systems or more, watch all the analytics. It's a lot of traffic, and it's not being looked at enough by administration. What's the load and what does it mean? So just to tell you, our new national study, we asked teachers, how much time are they spending on all this digital traffic, which they usually weren't spending in the classroom. So 12% or only 12% say 0 to 2 hours a week. 7% didn't know. They hadn't thought about it probably. But look at the high percentage that are spending 10 plus hours a week, 30%. Huge amount of time. That's a cost to their personal psyche and to the district and the school. Huge amount of traffic that hadn't really been there before. So this is something that we really want to point out as the Learning Council, is you need to know what you're doing to your people. Number three, biggest pressure. I already talked about this, loss of achievement. 51% of schools say there was a big loss of achievement in this last year. They're going to have to try to catch up. Okay, so number four, all this dramatic tech adoption. We surged in 2020. We're now calculating our 2021 numbers to make sure they're certain, but there was a $7.5 billion increase in tech spend in that 1 year. Huge. Here's where it landed. So the hardware market was up by 4.5 billion. Major software systems was 6.1. That's probably reverted. That number is going to be much higher in 2021 because so many new learning management systems have been purchased. In 2021, we already speculated that we would see this up by 400 million at least. Could be a lot more because there's way more CARES Act money than we actually anticipated when we first did these numbers. The digital paper versus paper numbers were that digital curriculum was up by 2.1 billion this last year. Paper dropped again, of course. Digital curriculum spend in 2021 is predicted to be up another 2 billion. Like, I know, Ellen, I think if you're still on, you were already asking about, vetting all these commercial grade apps and resource sites and libraries and repositories and that kind of stuff. A lot of spend happening we're anticipating. Most of the companies that Learning Counsel knows that sell any type of digital courseware or like vital sources of courseware plus full libraries of books, huge off the charts growth. Paper resources spend, of course, will be down again. Here's the consumer comparison, and this is sort of part of the threat horizon for schools to really be thinking about, is that straight to consumer digital curriculum jumped really high, like over $1 billion in a couple, 6 months in the consumer space this last year, from March at the start of shutdowns through, another 6 months later. Huge surge of $1 billion in additional spend. That's because people were shopping, going, I got to make sure my kid's learning something, what might be age appropriate, and they hit the app markets, or they hit websites, or they did Google searches to find various and sundry things. That's continuing. In terms of what that's doing to the American public is it's teaching them what commercial grade user interface and user navigation really looks like, how perfect it is, and the fact that it will use gaming interface with animated characters, and you can pick out your own purple hair color and all kinds of other exciting things, versus what we call the flat digital world that's often happening in schools, which is a recorded lecture and a PDF 9 times out of 10. Those are flat digital usually, versus, like I'm saying, the animated, I'm shown a pathway, I ping through the first one, I get the next one, that kind of stuff. So there's also number 5, the huge complexity of the digital model. Digital models are hard. If you just look at this model, the Learning Counsel pioneered, and you think about your layers of your portals, now thinking about hybrid logistics and your master scheduling platform, having single sign-on, access management, security, and then down below that, your major repository systems like your student information system, your learning management system, the professional development platform, and then over in the grades, you've got different apps hitting in different grade levels. Maybe you got certain math apps for certain grades and certain language apps for other grades. So it's a very complex model, and it's blowing up people's networks. So what we want to talk about today is really the real transition. So we're seeing a move away from that whole grade whole group grades, classes, courses, pyramid style bureaucracy to a mutation that is delivery through tech. Still using teachers, most of the instances. But then what every school is doing is what you're seeing in the middle of this chart. They're trying to run down both rails. This is exhausting for the organization and enormously taxing not only on their budgets, but their psyche. And when you don't think about your model, then you're trying to solve problems. And oftentimes some kids are left behind, right? They just don't fit your model, so you're not going to deal with it. Versus where the whole market is inevitably going, which is towards personalized learning with distributed teacher service. An extra liminal network, which means outside the limits of your buildings and your network to use outside resources. Those might be professional grade sites, ebooks, courseware. It might even be a scientist from NASA comes in and does a lesson for that day on Zoom. But thinking extra limitedly to use other humans and resources beyond your own limit is really what extra liminal means. So this is mutating the whole group idea. That's a big mental jump for a lot of people to try to grasp. So let's talk about these models. So model one is the traditional school, but now it's all digital. You've got devices for everyone. So you've altered in that way. But now, during the pandemic, you also experienced alternate schedules. So the schedules might be weekly rotations of who can be in the building. They might be daily rotations. Maybe you've got Fridays off, like some of the Atlanta districts. But in any case, maybe your blocks have changed as well. So you got longer blocks for language, shorter ones for some other subject, and you've just mutated time and space. So even if you're traditional, you're dealing with this. And then you've got blended flip traditional, which the major difference here in the middle of this graphic, and I know it's probably hard to read, this is all in the special report, you can download that, is you're trying to manage all your teachers to plan their lessons early enough so that they have activity-based classroom where it's human to human, and all the things that are reading oriented are done off campus. Those are your homework moments where there's dedicated days of doing those things. But in any case, you're flipping the model. All right, so then the next one is the competency-based contemporary. You don't see this in a lot of public schools, but you see it in a lot of the private schools where they have very few teachers. Teacher has to teach to a lot of kids. So they go to a check sheet oriented system, or a little bit like what Stacy Perez from Classical Academy was talking about today, where everybody can be on their own individual path, but there's oversight. There's probably a lot less lecturing, and the distribution materials is mostly digital. Then there's hybrid logistics contemporary, where, actually, did I do this right? Hybrid logistics, competency-based contemporary, hybrid logistics contemporary. I'm gonna come back. I wanna go to fully online contemporary and come back to the other one. The basic organizing thing of fully online contemporary is what a lot of the big companies are doing. And you might do, if you're a school district, you set up a separate entity, but everything's online is essentially the way that that's working out. And it has far less human interaction. And then you have hybrid simultaneous traditional, which is where teachers are teaching via Zoom and they have physical kids in front of them. This is an enormously popular model right now, but it exhausts all the teachers. And then you have this new hybrid logistics contemporary model. And this model is also known as the Uberization of teaching, where you might just have giant homerooms, and as students pace through materials, they automatically cohort into bundles of cohorts, and they trigger the live classroom meeting where maybe there's a lecture or there's a project with hands-on work. That's a completely different model, and it's obviously of high interest because it sort of takes that logistics all the way to the point where you have physical presence, but you also have things online, but everyone's getting fully personalized learning, and teachers are spending way more time catching up the students that are behind rather than just sort of classroom oversight. Okay, so that sort of looks like hybrid logistics, personalized, where you've got this thing called real-time learning management, a lot of dashboards, a lot of data, a little bit like ClassLink was showing you today, and also VitalSource. The data world and being data literate is just gone nuclear during the pandemic. And it is now being thought of as the thing that's going to help manage all the logistics of personalizing learning. So the last model is hybrid high flex, and that is continuing to be traditional, but carving a couple hours out a day or maybe a full day a week, where you're going to the full hybrid logistics model where everybody's on a personal pace, maybe just for extracurricular or remedial. So those are the main models. I think, did I skip one of them? Yeah, the hybrid logistics contemporary would use the Uberization model, but is using it in such a way where your rostering is more like an online organization. Okay, so those are the main models. And what I want to talk about next is, the future of hybrid logistics, and have you guys weigh in on sort of discussing this point. So hybrid logistics is running things in that Uberized way, and it's managing the schedule in an Uberized way. And it is the transition that is basically being driven by consumer expectations for high flexibility and full personalization. And again, that's coming in because the outside world of consumer digital curriculum, courseware, sites, and all that stuff is having a heavy influence on the minds of parents and students. They're expecting that, but they want to stay affiliated to a school because they like the human interchange, but they want it to be precision human interchange. So this is causing a discussion about teacher roles. What's a teacher really supposed to be doing? Is she sitting there in the classroom, just making sure everybody's doing their study, and then once in a while standing up and giving instructions? Is she roaming around? What is the purpose? What is the teacher really doing to really drive achievement? So those are the questions that are really, I know they sound really like rude questions, but those are the questions that come about when you really start to inspect your model. So I'm not going to get into all the courses right now by the EduJedi that are out, but those are something to know about. Just want to kind of open it up to see if people have questions or just want to talk about their models. And while I'm at it, sort of see who I can call on, who's participating right now, so we can talk about all this. I know, Ellen, you're on. Georgina, I know you're on. Want to make sure that you have an open mic to talk about model shift and what's happening on campus. And really, there's probably barriers for you too. Can't shift because, the state won't let me, all those kinds of things. I'm going to open up mics for who's on the line right now. See if anybody wants to pipe up. If you're here, hi, Ellen.
Hi. In looking at all your models that you're laying out that are kind of, popping up, I feel like right now our district is really, kind of stuck, I'm going to say, in that traditional model. And I think as, our EdTech team, we've always been very future focused. And so trying to help both district and site leaders kind of, make that shift is, I've always shared that our district is like a aircraft carrier and has been going, full force at full speed for a very long time. And so getting them to slow down a little bit and make that shift. We were very fortunate to be in a very great place when the pandemic hit, that we were one-to-one. We were, we were almost one-to-one. We had 7 schools that we ended up helping go one-to-one last year. But we had enough Chromebooks on campus and enough power cords in carts that we were able to pull them out and send them home that Friday. So all students had device. So now it's just working with the teachers, working with leadership to really understand what quality digital learning is. And I really like the idea of mutating to create that time and space to have that time, that precious time that you have with kids, be used for more meaningful, rigorous thinking activities, right? Getting kids to do the heavy lifting of doing the thinking when the teacher's there, and having them do more of those basic things at home when the parents, I always tell my kids' dad, don't worry about the worksheets. Whatever gets sent for homework, have them do the reading and have them do the reading journal, right? Yeah. Focus on that versus, did they do the spelling worksheet or the math worksheet? So kind of guarding that time, that use of time and space is very important. So
yeah, and I agree with you. And I think what what we're pointing out here is that the pressure that schools have, they're not always identifying. If we're asking people to step back and say, what's really going on? Because it feels like we're in the storm of the century and like everything's pulling us apart at the seams. And it's a model issue. Like being what you've always been for 250 years, grade and class structure, not fully personalized, trying to personalize only within context, like an IEP typically is like a slight mutation to an already existing schedule. Mm-hmm. But really going in the direction of what's happened in the rest of the outside world. Well, they've fully personalized. Like you could be 3 grades behind in math and 6 grades ahead in language. And suddenly the schedule tells you, you're just going to focus on math for now. You're going to be Uberized to focus, and teachers are going to SWAT team in on you. And it's a truly logistical change, which is totally capable of technology, right? Because the pressure that we're feeling, the lack of achievement that we're feeling, the desires by the outside public to have glorious journeys individualized for their child and flexible time is there. It's not going to go away. It just got exacerbated enormously with the pandemic. So the losing of kids is really prompting this discussion. So all the analysis is pointing to probably you're going to move to hybrid logistics contemporary eventually. You might do it in a partial fashion early, and then you'll go completely. So a lot of people are thinking, well, I'm already partially there because I have an online school, right? A separate function. That's not what everyone wants, though. Some people are like, yeah, I want to be mostly online, but then I want to see humans too. So I want to come in to the building. So it's an odd conversation, but I think it's one where when you go to your management and you say, let's step back from that, let's look at the pressure. What's the difference between Amazon and a local store? Huge difference. Amazon backward engineered in the physical presence by buying up a bunch of stores. Now they're physically in market. But there's a difference in our current culture of what people want to need. So when you think about the other drivers, the drivers are student agency just went nuclear too. It had to during the pandemic. It's like, you got to get your study done. You're at home, you got to log on, right? Like, what? I'm not a time manager. I'm 12. I just show up. Mom gives me my backpack and my lunch, and I'm out the door, and I just show up and the bells ring and I go to the next class, right? Now I got to wake up and get myself organized and get on camera. This was a huge student agency shift, but it could be harnessed. So I want to stop there. And Ellen, are you seeing a difference in student agency?
I have spent the good part of the beginning of the school year helping to onboard all of the apps. So we will start to do class walks. I anticipate that, yeah, for those students that were successful in the online, I know for my own kids, though, I have 2 different kids. My oldest is a geek kid. Rigor is like his joy. And I'm finding that he's tolerating being in person. Being back in class, is kind of like, I kind of liked it. He liked better being able to self-pace and just get the work done and not have to wait for his classmates. Where my little one, he thrives in the in-class setting, but he's a struggling learner. So, the first week of school, his teacher calls me like, I need help. I don't know how to engage him. I don't know how to get him going. He needs to be able to do things on his own. So I think it just depends on the student, really. It's going to go back. It goes back to personalizing is so needed.
Yeah, and that's definitely the truth. And so what we've learned, I think one of the biggest lessons out of the pandemic in terms of what your model could or should be as a school or as a district is predicated on the fact that every human is different. And we've been built to normalize, which is why when we wrote this last special report with all these models in it, right, we talked about the fact that we have a systemic inequity and it's the system. It's the way the system was built to look at all humans as age batches. You're the same moving through, and you're not. I mean, we've learned really the hard way in the pandemic, we're not. And it's really real to the consuming public that they're not. And they saw their students just like you've seen your kids. One of them did way better and the other one like wilted in the corner, just totally sad without the human interaction. And different people are at the different points. But that's why the model conversation is so important. And, you know, it's not going to go away that people keep seeing the outside consumer world do total customization of everything. And yet we're batching everybody normatized to the middle in public education, always. But it's tricky because you never want to like say, well, the teacher's not important. You can't say that. You got to figure out a way that the teacher becomes a primo piece, but in a very calculated and essential way, not just sitting in the classroom overseeing while kids study, which is a good portion of the time for a lot of teachers. Yeah, so I want to make sure if anybody else wants to comment on this model conversation and the statistical drivers that are forcing this conversation nationally, they want to ask any questions about it. Again, everything's in the special report, all these different models. Competency-based is, you know, something a lot of people talk about, but I also hear a lot of school districts say, we don't want to move to competency-based. Well, yeah, it's a scary model because then literally every single thing, every single student has to pass it. It's better to sort of look at pace-based. Maybe you're going to get a low grade in one thing, but that's easier to swallow for a lot of public education. Pace-based, not necessarily 100% competency-based. Still a lot of blended and flipped. But again, that traditional alt schedule is real for everybody now. And this is the first baby step into really starting to say, the master schedule is taking, 16 PhDs just to figure out, and still some kids don't get the classes they want. Maybe we need to pivot on how we use time and space. Like, this is not a workable model. So I'm waiting for you guys to pipe up if you want to say anything. If not, it's totally fine. We can move on. I think we have our next guest with us. So going once, going twice, just checking. I haven't checked questions yet. I should check questions.